Hey, y'all. I received the definitive technology, DefTech for short. Everybody calls it DefTech. I'm actually looking at the screen here. BP9020 tower speaker, built-in powered 8-inch subwoofer. Whew, that's a mouthful. Like 2 weeks ago, I guess. And they retail for about $250, at least on Amazon. The deal is that you probably just heard me say that it has a powered 8-inch bass driver, subwoofer driver, mid-bass driver, whatever you want to call it. And the thing, it's at the bottom of the speaker. So this is like the weirdest speaker that I've tested to date. And weird kind of has a negative connotation. I don't really mean it that way, but truthfully, it is kind of weird. I'll show you a blowed up or blown out view of the speaker here while I kind of explain what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the speaker. Now the front is right here where I've got my cursor, and you can see that it is an MTM design. An MTM is mid-range, tweeter, mid-range. Typically, vertical orientation for a MTM is good, but if it's horizontal, like a center channel, it's not good. We have a 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter and two 3.5-inch mid-ranges above and below that tweeter. Then we also have this 8-inch subwoofer with built-in 150-watt Class D amplifier that's right here, so it fires out to the side of the speaker. And then on the back, this is the kicker. This is kind of like the, is it called a coup de grace? Is that what that phrase is? You guys will let me know if I'm messing that up. There's a mid-range on the back of the speaker that is supposed to provide some sort of ambiance, like additional sound and flourishing, and oh my gosh, this sounds so rich and so buttery. I don't know. But in some ways, it's kind of cool. The speaker, when I got it, before I got it, I signed up to review it from a viewer, one of you guys, or you know who you are, so thank you for sending these out to me. I actually had them drop shipped directly from Amazon, and if you're interested in doing something like that yourself, let me know. I'm happy to review speakers if you want to have them shipped to me. I wasn't sure how I was going to test the speaker. Honestly, I'll be honest, I didn't take the time to look at the details of the speaker. The guy said, would you be interested in testing a DefTech speaker? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, why not? Because DefTech, in my experience, DefTech has kind of had a pretty good name, but it seems like in the last probably 10 years or so, their status has fallen off in this kind of high-end crowd, if you want to call it that, even for home theater and for 2-channel listening. And I was thinking, yeah, dude, totally, send it my way. I'd be happy to check it out. And then I pulled up the specs and I realized that it has this powered 8-inch subwoofer in it. And I thought, how am I even going to be able to test that? But yeah, I could. So the deal is, and I'm going to show you a picture. On the back, it has your standard speaker level input, like a passive speaker typically does. It also has an LFE input, which the manual, basically they tell you don't do that. Don't hook it up that way. And then it has a gain knob for the bass, where the separate amplifier is powering the subwoofer. So when you need to feed this thing a signal, you just feed it your standard speaker plus minus cables, and that's it. The speaker takes care of the rest. All the insides have the internal routing for the crossover, and then to the amplifier that powers the subwoofer on its own. And it's really weird. It's like a hybrid powered passive speaker. I think it's the first time I've tested a speaker of this nature, but it works. The bass on this speaker gets down to like 30 hertz or so in room. Anechoic, I think the F3 is at about 35 hertz. So this speaker plays relatively flat. And I'm just going to go and tell you, all in all, for $250 each, so $500 a pair, I'm really torn as to whether I would say buy it or not to buy it. Now, when listening to it, it has a pretty wide soundstage, which I like. Vertically, you've got to be careful of where you sit, because that lobing cancellation that I talked about earlier, that's going to matter vertically. So if your ears aren't basically right on line with that tweeter, that's going to be a problem. And the issue with this particular model, because there are other models that just scale up in size and drivers, is that this one is just about 3 feet tall. So the tweeter level is going to be short. In my chair, I was above the tweeter by a few inches at least. I didn't break out the tape measure. And that kind of presented a problem. So when I would slouch down, I could tell that the imaging focused better, the tonality smoothed out better overall. with that in mind, if you're able to listen directly on axis with the tweeter or thereabouts, maybe within a few degrees, I would say this. Number one, this speaker sounds somewhat neutral. And I say somewhat because the treble has a good kick up right in the sibilant range, around like 4 to 6 kilohertz. So all the S's, they're extra harsh. The problem with this particular speaker is sometimes you can just turn a speaker away from you, right? Like normally I listen with speakers facing directly at me, and then I toe them away from me, facing more out into the room toward this shoulder. Left speaker gets this left shoulder, right speaker gets the right shoulder. And I start playing with toe in, toe out that way. Toe in's pointed directly at me. That's how I define it. If you define it a different way, that's fine, but now you know what I'm talking about. Turning the speaker away from my ears a little bit more toward my shoulder, it got rid of some of the higher treble energy, but I didn't necessarily need that. What I was trying to do was to get rid of that lower treble energy, that 4 to 6 kilohertz, that sibilant range, that sibilant sound, because I'm extra sensitive to that and it drives me nuts. This speaker has pretty good directivity right in that region, basically meaning that the on-axis response and the off-axis response coalesce right there. And because of that, the reflections in the room are reinforcing the direct sound, and they just kind of lump up right in that region, that lower treble region. So no matter how much toe in or toe out you have, basically, unless you turn the speaker facing the wall behind it, it's probably going to sound a bit sibilant to you. You can use equalization to bring that down, but I really want to point that out because for me, that would be a deal breaker. Like if I have to listen to a speaker that has a sibilant sound, it's really going to grate on my nerves. I'm going to be reaching for the equalization and trying to bring that down. And if I don't have equalization, I'm just not going to use that speaker. Now, some of you may not have an issue with that, but I really want to make sure that you understand that aspect because to me, that's probably the biggest flaw in this speaker. Now, again, the bass, dude, it's legit. Like it gets down to 30 hertz in the room without a problem. Anechoic, it's kind of flat right through that region. There's a small resonant peak on the lower end, and I'll show you that in the data in a little bit. But otherwise, the bass is really, really impressive, at least at moderate volumes, like the 80 to 85 decibel at about 3 meters or so listening distance in your room. The mid-range, though, let's talk about the mid-range. Remember that mid-range I told you that was on the back of the speaker? Well, that's cool, but it sucks also. And the reason for that is if the speaker didn't have that mid-range on the back, everything would be fine. It would sound pretty neutral for the most part. It wouldn't impart any additional sonic characteristics of the speaker itself. And imaging would probably be, I'm not even editing that out, more focused, but that mid-range on the back that's supposed to add ambiance and however you want to pronounce it, to your soundstage. Well, what that does is that comes at a cost of imaging precision. And you can imagine that if you have basically two sound sources radiating the same sound at the same time, but one is hitting a wall behind the speaker and it's reflecting back immediately, that's going to cause a little bit more of a diffuse sound rather than having no additional mid-range at the back of the speaker and it just frontward firing. So while it does open up the soundstage more, it doesn't do it through the entire mid-range from like 200 hertz to 2 or 3 kilohertz. What it does is it really just kind of puts that emphasis on the mid-range, I guess. Let's say like 500 hertz to 1,000 hertz. So it's kind of tough to describe, and it's one of those things that you probably need to hear to get a better understanding of it. But really what it ultimately boils down to is that the soundstage loses its precision, its imaging, its focus, and it causes vocals to actually sound a little bit chesty because there's cancellation from that rear mid-range at that frequency band. And at the lower mid-range, there's not that cancellation. So that lower mid-range is a little bit more bloomy compared to that mid-range. I want to note real fast, when I was doing my listening, I did play around with I'll call it a volume, but it's basically a gain knob for the subwoofer that's built into the speaker. I initially started it off with the median point, which is emphasized by like a little blue dot on the back. And that's how I tested it. That's how I tested this speaker. I wound up dropping the level down and I increased a little bit. And honestly, I found that just below the middle point, I mean, just a hair, just a smidge below that middle point was the best for my room, because otherwise it would actually sound a little bit too bloated. That's not the speaker's fault. That's the room's fault. The room is doing way too much and really messing with that mid bass, that lower mid bass, and that sub bass region. Another thing that I really want to point out too is that as you turn the volume up, that subwoofer has a limiter built into it. So if let's start over. Let's say you're listening at a lower volume, like maybe 70 decibels at your listening position, and you've got a good solid 30 hertz thump from whatever track you're listening to, okay? As you turn the volume up, what you'll notice is that solid 30 hertz thump may start to decline a little bit. That 50 hertz kick drum may start to decline a little bit. And as you get to the maximum output volume of the speaker, that lower mid bass and subwoofer region is really, really diminished. It's taken down because that's what the limiter is built to do. And that lessens the distortion, but it also simply lessens the output. All right, so now that I've gotten through that and just the basic, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't really even thinking about doing a video about it, but I thought it's a neat speaker. You need to hear about it. And if you want to order it for $500 a pair, it might be worth just trying out for the heck of it. Then you can send it back if you don't like it, or go check them out at your dealer. All that subjective stuff aside, let's take a look at the data, because I like to look at data and it gives you a better idea of what this speaker's doing before you even put it into the room. Okay? We're going to look at the data right quick. And I'm going to blow through this one kind of fast. And I hope you enjoy it, because there's a lot to learn here. This is the on-axis response and listening window. Average sensitivity of about 87.7, so roughly 88 decibels if you just want to round up. The F3 at 35 hertz, this speaker gets down low, but notice the F10 is at 29 hertz. So once it starts rolling off, that's it. It's basically like a brick wall filter. This region right here is a bit cuppy. This little suck out is due to the mid-range behind the speaker. And then we can see the treble is kind of lifted, but let's see what happens at the CEA 2034 dataset. And here we are. I want to first look at the ERDI. How EQable is this speaker? Well, for the most part, it's pretty EQable. This dip right here, you're probably thinking, what the heck is that? But remember, there's a mid-range behind this speaker. So that mid-range behind the speaker means that this speaker is actually acting pretty much omnidirectionally in this region right here, which is about maybe 400, 500, 600, 700 hertz in this ballpark right here. And that's why the on-axis response is lower than the sound power and the early reflections. It's basically, again, omnidirectional in that region, which helps to provide that sense of spaciousness, but also hurts the imaging focus and precision. This is the estimated in-room response at 0 and 30 degrees. And then I've just drawn a line kind of how I heard it. Now, this line is subjective, as are these notes. The data is not subjective, it is objective. I noted a chesty mid-range around 200 to 300 hertz. Then we see I have a note for sibilant and boosted high frequency. You can equalize this down. Horizontal contour plot is at about plus or minus 7 degrees, but see how it's all over the place? That means that sounds that are supposed to be at one location in the soundstage at one frequency, it may be at another location in the soundstage at another frequency. That's problematic. Generally, what you want is something that is maybe not necessarily flat, but smooth and controlled. So the radiation pattern of the speaker is not ideal, but it is pretty wide. Vertical orientation of the speaker, as I said earlier, is really important. You need to make sure that you're at least within 20 degrees above or below that tweeter line. Harmonic distortion at 86 decibels, looks good. Harmonic distortion at 96 decibels, it's creeping up, but it's still reasonable at about 3% or below. Multitone distortion, if it's below negative 30 decibels, for me, I call that adequate. If you want to listen to this thing at super duper loud levels, you may notice some mid-range distortion, but for the most part, I think this is okay. Compression is the real key thing that I talked about earlier. As you turn the volume up from low to high, you're going to get less bass output, and that's what we see here. Even in the mid-range, there is compression as well. I would say, for most rooms, if you're about 2 to 3 meters away, you could probably be okay with standard outputs of about like maybe 85 decibels. with peaks up to 95 decibels of dynamic range, but don't expect to be listening to this thing crazy loud, even though it has a built-in subwoofer. Yeah, so let me know what you think. I mean, ultimately, the data actually looks pretty good. It's not the greatest thing ever, but if you compare it to the Sony, what is it, the CSS 5 or 3, the tower speakers that I reviewed recently, which are also almost $500 a pair, those speakers are horrible compared to this speaker. So if you're like, I've got $500, Aaron, what tower speaker should I get? So far, this is probably going to be the one that I'm going to recommend. Now, I got to be honest, I don't have that many tower speakers under my belt in this price range. So this is like newbie advice, right? In terms of what tower speaker for $500 should I buy? But I'm actually genuinely impressed with the overall performance of the speaker. And truthfully, a couple bands of parametric EQ make all the difference in the world in this speaker. To me, that sibilant region, that 4 to 6K, bring that down like 2 decibels. And then that 200 to 300 hertz region, if you could just bring that down like 1 decibel to get some of that extra chestiness to go away. And then you've got that really weird but cool spacious vibe going on with that rear mounted mid-range. I don't necessarily consider that an accurate type thing, but it's different and it's fun. And in some ways it's reminiscent of the Bose 901 speakers that I've reviewed years ago and actually enjoyed, even though in terms of tonality, they were terrible, but the imaging stuff was really neat. So if you're interested, check it out. I do have an affiliate link for this. I'll have it in the description below. If you don't mind clicking that, it's like 4% is what I get. It's not a lot, but it would help. You know, I'll just be honest with you. It would help. If you don't like affiliate links, you can always just Google the speaker and find it that way. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something and let me know what you think. I will talk to you all later. Take care. Peace.